Mozart's traces in southern Bavaria, in the region around the town of Augsburg, one comes across the possible origins of the name and the family. Mozart, Mozart, the people of the moor. Even nowadays in the Augsburg telephone directory, there are a few Mozarts, not excluding distant relatives of Father Leopold, who was born here. The father's family tree goes back to include members of the farming class, as well as a series of various craftsmen. Leopold's father was a bookbinder. His background was simple, but there was a strongly marked leaning towards the Catholicism of the South German area. Who was this Leopold Mozart? The biographers do not throw much light on him. Two contrasting views of the figure of Mozart's father are still valid nowadays. On the one hand, the monster who mercilessly exploited his children to earn money, and on the other, the great, enlightened, Jesuit, educated teacher, without whom the son would never have been able to become the man he did. Let us concern ourselves with this image of Leopold. He attended the Jesuit school in Augsburg for 12 years, and this made a lasting impression on him for the rest of his life. It also had an equally powerful and positive influence on the way he brought up his two children. An all-round education of the heart, of the emotions, and of the mind are the essential characteristics of a Jesuit upbringing. This also had an influence on the violin tutor that Leopold Mozart published in 1756 in Salzburg, which renowned teachers still regard not only as indispensable, but also unsurpassed standard work of violin teaching.
Jetzt ganz ruhig, obere Bogenhälfte. Spielen wir weiter, die nächste Stelle. Ja, Acht geben, dass der Ton kommt, nicht zu leise.
It is not to be taken for granted that teaching is still, of course, based on this tutor in Leopold Mozart's hometown, not for sentimental reasons, but from conviction.
And then he says fundamental principles of violin playing. We violinists understand that. Fundamental in the sense of all-embracing. It contains everything from the simplest beginnings to the most complicated technique. Actually, the only thing that is missing is the final blow to Paganini. It is fundamental in terms of craft, but at that time, fundamental was a concept that also meant well-founded, academically founded, and philosophically founded. And again with education, well-founded with an all-embracing education. His aim was to train musicians by means of this violin tutelage in such a way that they were not only good violinists, but so that they were good all-round musicians with good taste. And he says, truth and purity in music have to be recognized with reason and feeling.
Und jetzt dramatisch. Und
Shit in bed and make a noise.
Coarse words spoken by Anna Maria Mozart, née Pertl, to her husband Leopold. The phrase tells us more about the widespread enjoyment of humor related to bodily functions than about Mozart's mother. She was born in 1720 in St. Gilgen am Wolfgangsee, near to Salzburg. She spent an uneventful childhood and youth there as the daughter of the local resident court administrator. Music and art were not really important in her life, until she met Leopold Mozart in Salzburg and married him. Games with the subjunctive. What would have happened if Leopold Mozart had not moved to Salzburg and met the attractive Anna Maria Pertl? And what would have happened if Leopold had taken up a theological profession after all, and if he had not been a musician and composer in the service of Sigismund von Schrattenbach, the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg? What would have happened if the Prince Archbishop had not been so well disposed and benevolent towards the Mozart family? And what would have happened if he had not so generously supported the extended trips abroad of the child prodigy and his family right across Europe?
Dearest Mama, my heart is full of joy from sheer pleasure because I am so happy on this journey. because it is so warm in the coach, and because our coach driver is a gallant fellow.
Mozart's journey as a child prodigy through Europe can only be described as concert business. The trips were excellently planned and organized by Father Leopold, thanks to a well-organized network of the clergy and nobility right across Europe. At first, both child prodigies, Nannl and little Wolfgang, performed something like a circus attraction to benevolent and frequently generous audiences between Vienna and London, Naples and Frankfurt. Nevertheless, Mozart was not the only child to travel. Documents from the period report about highly talented musical children who traveled with their fathers or mothers on concert tours throughout Europe. They did not attend school. The highly talented children were taught during the long coach rides, like Wolfgang and Nannl, by their father.
It is not really right to go in search of talent in kindergartens and schools, but this is exactly what we are accustomed to doing. In other words, the children are being prepared for something that society assumes for them. This is the central problem, I think. Instead of trying, and the Finnish school system is a great exception, to filter out talent, because every person has talents. There are no people without talent, and there are many who are gifted. We simply have to recognize it. Instead of properly encouraging them, we try to make everyone the same, and if possible, to fit into a mold where talent doesn't mean anything. That is the school. That is why I claim it was perhaps a great stroke of fortune that Mozart did not go to school for a single day. Perhaps going to school would have ruined his talent.
Child prodigies are not exclusively a fascinating feature of the 18th century. The highly talented child as an object to show off is a fixed component of present-day sensationalist society. But as it was in Mozart's day, what is still true nowadays is that first the personality has to be there and an extraordinary talent before special abilities can develop.
The first Mozart I think I learned is this. And of course the magic flute. This is I think the earliest impression for me about Mozart, and I just love it from right away, because I played lots of Mozart sonata when I was a kid, and obviously I played not very good, just kids playing, but I just really love it, all the melodies. That time, when I was a kid, I just loved the melodies.
One of the essential mysteries of Mozart's music, the apparent simplicity that makes it possible for almost anyone who's interested in music to make an equally simple beginning, either as a listener or making music themselves. At some point, the paths divide, and even the very great names, either conductors or pianists, when talking about interpreting his compositions, always speak of a lifelong approach without ever arriving. The Mozart family approached the British Isles in April 1764. Crossing the Channel was terrible for them, and they were all seasick. When they arrived in London, the Mozart family had already been travelling for 11 months.
Miss Mozart, 11 years old, and Master Mozart, 7 years old. Natural prodigies take the opportunity of performing the greatest miracle in public that mankind has ever known. Everyone will be astonished to hear such a young child play the harpsichord to such perfection.
These rather questionable concert announcements were followed by concerts performed by the child prodigies before the King and Queen of England. The subsequent performances made Leopold Mozart a rich man.
To everyone's amazement, there were only a few hundred in the audience, but the most eminent persons in the whole of London and the first families of England. I cannot say yet whether I will be left with 100 guineas profit, but it is certainly not less than 90.
Nowadays, the house in Soho can still be seen, where every day between 12 noon and 2 p.m, people paid an entrance fee to admire the two child prodigies. Journeys to Italy.
The manual or the keyboard of the piano will be completely concealed by a cloth, and the boy will play just as well on the cloth as if he could see the keyboard. Furthermore, he will be able to name precisely all the notes that one can see and hear individually or in chords on the piano, or on all imaginable instruments, bells, glasses, and clocks.
The first journey to Italy between December 1769 and March 1771. Triumphant performances by Wolfgang in Verona, Milan, Bologna, Florence, Rome, and Naples. Highly acclaimed public performances alternated with private concerts in the palaces of the high nobility and before the highest circles of the clergy. Whereas the Mozarts were fascinated in London by the progressive street lighting, never seen before, Naples meant for them the encounter with a completely exotic world. Away from the highly cultivated Italian opera culture, at the court of the Neapolitan king, completely foreign sounds could be heard here. And what child at this time had ever stood before an erupting volcano?
We also saw Vesuvius. Today, Vesuvius was completely covered in smoke. Naples is beautiful, but there are just as many beggars as in Vienna and Paris. And as regards the impudence of the beggars, I have the feeling that Naples is worse than London, because here the beggars have their gang leaders, who get 25 silver ducats a month to guarantee a certain kind